China, officially the People's Republic of China, is a country in East Asia. With a population exceeding 1.4 billion, it is the world's second most populous country. China spans the equivalent of 5 time zones and borders 14 countries by land. With an area of nearly 9.6 million square kilometers, it is the third largest country by total land area. The country is divided into 33 province-level divisions, inclusive of 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, 4 municipalities, and 2 semi-autonomous special administrative regions. Beijing is the national capital, while Shanghai is its most populous city and largest financial center. One of the cradles of civilization, China has been inhabited since the Paleolithic era, with the earliest dynasties emerging in the Yellow River Basin before the late 2nd millennium BCE. The 8th to 3rd centuries BCE saw a breakdown in the authority of the Zhou dynasty, accompanied by the emergence of administrative and military techniques, literature, philosophy, and historiography. In 221 BCE, China was unified under an emperor for the first time. Appointed non-hereditary officials began ruling counties instead of the aristocracy, ushering in more than 2 millennia of imperial dynasties including the Qin, Han, Tang, Yuan, Ming, and Qing. With the invention of gunpowder and paper, the establishment of the Silk Road, and the building of the Great Wall, Chinese culture including languages, traditions, architecture, philosophy, and technology flourished and has heavily influenced East Asia and beyond. After decades of struggle, the monarchy was overthrown in 1912 and the Republic of China was established. Despite China's eventual victory in the Second Sino-Japanese War and the Pacific War in general, numerous atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre left lasting effects on the country. Concurrently during this period, the Chinese Communist Party and the Kuomintang government were fighting sporadically since 1927, with a brief truce as a united front when Japan began invading the country. The second phase of the Civil War resumed not long after Japan was defeated, and by 1949, the CCP had established control on most of the territories of the country. As the KMT retreated to Taiwan, the country was split with both sides claiming to be the sole legitimate government of China. After the land reforms, later attempts to realize communism failed. The Great Leap Forward led to a massive famine of millions of citizens, while the Cultural Revolution caused a chaotic period of persecution and zealous Maoist populism. In 1971, the PRC replaced the ROC as China's representation in the United Nations. Following the Sino-Soviet split, the Shanghai Communique in 1972 marked the beginning of normalized relations with the United States. Economic reforms that began in 1978 led by reformists within the CCP moved the country away from a socialist planned economy toward an increasingly capitalist market economy, spurring significant economic growth, although liberal and democratic political reforms stalled after the June 4 incident in 1989. China is a unitary one-party socialist republic led by the CCP. It is a founding member of the UN and one of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. It is a founding member of several multilateral and regional organizations such as the AIIB, the Silk Road Fund, the New Development Bank, and the RCEP. It is a member of the BRICS, the G20, APEC, the SCO, and the East Asia Summit. Making up around 1/5 of the world economy, the Chinese economy is the world's largest economy by GDP at purchasing power parity, the second largest economy by nominal GDP, and the second wealthiest country, albeit ranking poorly in measures of democracy, human rights, and religious freedoms. The country has been one of the fastest growing major economies and is the world's largest manufacturer and exporter, as well as the second largest importer. China is a nuclear weapon state with the world's largest standing army by military personnel and the second largest defense budget. It is a great power and a regional power. History. Archaeological evidence suggests that early hominids inhabited China 2.25 million years ago. The hominid fossils of Peking man, a Homo erectus who used fire, have been dated to between 680,000 and 780,000 years ago. The fossilized teeth of Homo sapiens dated to 80,000 years ago have been discovered in Fuyan Cave. Chinese proto-writing existed in Jiahu around 6600 BCE, at Damaidi around 6000 BCE, Datuan from 5800 to 5400 BCE, and Banpo dating from the 5th millennium BCE. Some scholars have suggested that the Jiahu symbols constituted the earliest Chinese writing system. Imperial China. Qin and Han. The Warring States period ended in 221 BCE after the state of Qin conquered the other 6 states, reunited China, and established the dominant order of autocracy. King Zheng of Qin proclaimed himself the emperor of the Qin dynasty, becoming the first emperor of a unified China. He enacted Qin's legalist reforms, notably the standardization of Chinese characters, measurements, road widths, and currency. His dynasty also conquered the Yu tribes in Guangxi, Guangdong, and northern Vietnam. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years, falling soon after the first emperor's death. Following widespread revolts during which the imperial library was burned, the Han dynasty emerged to rule China between 206 BCE and CE 220, creating a cultural identity among its populace still remembered in the ethnonym of the modern Han Chinese. The Han expanded the empire's territory considerably, with military campaigns reaching Central Asia, Mongolia, Korea, and Yunnan, and the recovery of Guangdong and northern Vietnam from Nanyue. Han involvement in Central Asia and Sogdia helped establish the land route of the Silk Road, replacing the earlier path over the Himalayas to India. Han China gradually became the largest economy of the ancient world. Despite the Han's initial decentralization and the official abandonment of the Qin philosophy of legalism in favor of Confucianism, Qin's legalist institutions and policies continued to be employed by the Han government and its successors. 3 kingdoms, Jin, Northern, and Southern dynasties. After the end of the Han dynasty, a period of strife known as 3 kingdoms followed, at the end of which Wei was swiftly overthrown by the Jin dynasty. The Jin fell to civil war upon the ascension of a developmentally disabled emperor. The 5 barbarians then rebelled and ruled northern China as the 16 states. The Xianbei unified them as the Northern Wei, whose emperor Xiaoan reversed his predecessor's apartheid policies and enforced a drastic sinification on his subjects. In the south, the general Lu Yu secured the abdication of the Jin in favor of the Lu Song. The various successors of these states became known as the Northern and Southern dynasties, with the 2 areas finally reunited by the Sui in 581. Sui, Tang, and Song. The Sui restored the Han to power through China, reformed its agriculture, economy, and imperial examination system, constructed the Grand Canal, and patronized Buddhism. However, they fell quickly when their conscription for public works and a failed war in northern Korea provoked widespread unrest. Under the succeeding Tang and Song dynasties, Chinese economy, technology, and culture entered a golden age. The Tang dynasty retained control of the western regions and the Silk Road, which brought traders to as far as Mesopotamia and the Horn of Africa, and made the capital Chang'an a cosmopolitan urban center. However, it was devastated and weakened by the Inlushan rebellion in the 8th century. In 907, the Tang disintegrated completely when the local military governors became ungovernable. The Song dynasty ended the separatist situation in 960, leading to a balance of power between the Song and the Liao dynasty. The Song was the first government in world history to issue paper money and the first Chinese polity to establish a permanent navy, which was supported by the developed shipbuilding industry along with the sea trade. Between the 10th and 11th century CE, the population of China doubled to around 100 million people, mostly because of the expansion of rice cultivation in central and southern China, and the production of abundant food surpluses. The Song dynasty also saw a revival of Confucianism, in response to the growth of Buddhism during the Tang, and a flourishing of philosophy and the arts, as landscape art and porcelain were brought to new levels of complexity. However, the military weakness of the Song army was observed by the Jin dynasty. In 1127, Emperor Huizong of Song and the capital Bianjing were captured during the Jin-Song Wars. The remnants of the Song retreated to southern China. UN. The Mongol conquest of China began in 1205 with the gradual conquest of western Xia by Genghis Khan, who also invaded Jin territories. In 1271, the Mongol leader Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, which conquered the last remnant of the Song dynasty in 1279. Before the Mongol invasion, the population of Song China was 120 million citizens. This was reduced to 60 million by the time of the census in 1300. A peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang overthrew the Yuan in 1368 and founded the Ming dynasty as the Honghu Emperor. Under the Ming dynasty, China enjoyed another golden age, developing one of the strongest navies in the world and a rich and prosperous economy amid a flourishing of art and culture. It was during this period that Admiral Zheng He led the Ming treasure voyages throughout the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as East Africa. Ming. In the early Ming dynasty, China's capital was moved from Nanjing to Beijing. With the budding of capitalism, philosophers such as Wang Yangming critiqued and expanded Neo-Confucianism with concepts of individualism and equality of four occupations. The scholar-official stratum became a supporting force of industry and commerce in the tax boycott movements, which, together with the famines and defense against Japanese invasions of Korea and later Jin incursions, led to an exhausted treasury. In 1644, Beijing was captured by a coalition of peasant rebel forces led by Li Zichun. The Chongzhen Emperor committed suicide when the city fell. The Manchu Qing dynasty, then allied with Ming dynasty general Wu Sangui, overthrew Li's short-lived Shun dynasty and subsequently seized control of Beijing, which became the new capital of the Qing dynasty. Qing. The Qing dynasty, which lasted from 1644 until 1912, was the last imperial dynasty of China. The Ming-Qing transition cost 25 million lives, but the Qing appeared to have restored China's imperial power and inaugurated another flowering of the arts. After the southern Ming ended, the further conquest of the Dzungar Khanate added Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang to the empire. Meanwhile, China's population growth resumed and shortly began to accelerate. It is commonly agreed that pre-modern China's population experienced two growth spurts, one during the Northern Song period, and other during the Qing period. By the High Qing era, China was possibly the most commercialized country in the world, and Imperial China experienced a second commercial revolution by the end of the 18th century. On the other hand, the centralized autocracy was strengthened in part to suppress anti-Qing sentiment with the policy of valuing agriculture and restraining commerce, like the Haijin during the early Qing period, and ideological control as represented by the literary inquisition, causing some social and technological stagnation. Fall of the Qing dynasty. In the mid-19th century, the Opium Wars with Britain and France forced China to pay compensation, open treaty ports, allow extraterritoriality for foreign nationals, and cede Hong Kong to the British under the 1842 Treaty of Nanking, the first of what have been termed as the unequal treaties. The First Sino-Japanese War resulted in Qing China's loss of influence in the Korean peninsula, as well as the cession of Taiwan to Japan. The Qing dynasty also began experiencing internal unrest in which tens of millions of people died, especially in the White Lotus Rebellion, the failed Taiping Rebellion that ravaged southern China in the 1850s and 1860s, and the Dungan Revolt in the northwest. The initial success of the self-strengthening movement of the 1860s was frustrated by a series of military defeats in the 1880s and 1890s. In the 19th century, the Great Chinese Diaspora began. Losses due to emigration were added to by conflicts and catastrophes such as the Northern Chinese Famine of 1876 to 1879, in which between 9 and 13 million people died. The Guangxu Emperor drafted a reform plan in 1898 to establish a modern constitutional monarchy, but these plans were thwarted by the Empress Dowager Cixi. The ill-fated anti-foreign Boxer Rebellion of 1899 to 1901 further weakened the dynasty. Although Cixi sponsored a program of reforms known as the Late Qing Reforms, the Xinhai Revolution of 1911 to 1912 ended the Qing dynasty and established the Republic of China. Huai, the last emperor, abdicated in 1912. Establishment of the Republic and World War II. On January 1, 1912, the Republic of China was established, and Sun Yat-sen of the Kuomintang was proclaimed provisional president. In March 1912, the presidency was given to Yuan Shikai, a former Qing general who in 1915 proclaimed himself Emperor of China. In the face of popular condemnation and opposition from his own Beiyang army, he was forced to abdicate and re-establish the Republic in 1916. After Yuan Shikai's death in 1916, China was politically fragmented. Its Beijing-based government was internationally recognized but virtually powerless. Regional warlords controlled most of its territory. During this period, China participated in World War I and saw a far-reaching popular uprising. In the late 1920s, the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek was able to reunify the country under its own control with a series of deft military and political maneuverings known collectively as the Northern Expedition. The Kuomintang moved the nation's capital to Nanjing and implemented political tutelage, an intermediate stage of political development outlined in Sun Yat-sen's Three Principles of the People program for transforming China into a modern democratic state. The Kuomintang briefly allied with the Chinese Communist Party during the Northern Expedition, though the alliance broke down in 1927 after Chiang violently suppressed the CCP and other leftists Shanghai, marking the beginning of the Chinese Civil War. The CCP declared areas of the country as the Chinese Soviet Republic in November 1931 in Rujin, Jiangxi. The Jiangxi Soviet was wiped out by the KMT armies in 1934, leading the CCP to initiate the Long March and relocate to Yan'an in Shaanxi. It would be the base of the Communists before major combat in the Chinese Civil War ended in 1949. In 1931, Japan invaded and occupied Manchuria. Japan invaded other parts of China in 1937, precipitating the Second Sino-Japanese War, a theater of World War II. The war forced an uneasy alliance between the Kuomintang and the CCP. Japanese forces committed numerous war atrocities against the civilian population, as many as 20 million Chinese civilians died. An estimated 40,000 to 300,000 Chinese were massacred in Nanjing alone during the Japanese occupation. China, along with the UK, the United States, and the Soviet Union, were recognized as the Allied Big Four in the declaration by United Nations. Along with the other three great powers, China was one of the four major allies of World War II, and was later considered one of the primary victors in the war. After the surrender of Japan in 1945, Taiwan, including the Penghu, was handed over to Chinese control. However, the validity of this handover is controversial. People's Republic. China emerged victorious but war-ravaged and financially drained. The continued distrust between the Kuomintang and the Communists led to the resumption of civil war. Constitutional rule was established in 1947, but because of the ongoing unrest, many provisions of the ROC Constitution were never implemented in mainland China. Afterwards, the CCP took control of most of mainland China, and the ROC government retreated offshore to Taiwan. On October 1, 1949, CCP Chairman Mao Zedong formally proclaimed the People's Republic of China in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. In 1950, the PRC captured Hainan from the ROC and annexed Tibet. However, remaining Kuomintang forces continued to wage an insurgency in western China throughout the 1950s. The CCP consolidated its popularity among the peasants through the land reform movement, which included the state-tolerated executions of between 1 and 2 million landlords by peasants and former tenants. Though the PRC initially allied closely with the Soviet Union, the relations between the two communist nations gradually deteriorated, leading China to develop an independent industrial system and its own nuclear weapons. The Chinese population increased from 550 million in 1950 to 900 million in 1974. However, the Great Leap Forward, an idealistic massive industrialization project, resulted in an estimated 15 to 55 million deaths between 1959 and 1961, mostly from starvation. In 1964, China's first atomic bomb exploded successfully. In 1966, Mao and his allies launched the Cultural Revolution, sparking a decade of political recrimination and social upheaval that lasted until Mao's death in 1976. In October 1971, the PRC replaced the ROC in the United Nations, and took its seat as a permanent member of the Security Council. Reforms and contemporary history. After Mao's death, the Gang of Four was arrested by Hua Qiubeng and held responsible for the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution was rebuked, with millions rehabilitated. Deng Xiaoping took power in 1978, and instituted large-scale political and economic reforms, together with the 8 elders, most senior and influential members of the party. The government loosened its control and the communes were gradually disbanded. Agricultural collectivization was dismantled and farmlands privatized. While foreign trade became a major focus, special economic zones were created. Inefficient state-owned enterprises were restructured and some closed. This marked China's transition away from planned economy. China adopted its current constitution on December 4, 1982. In 1989, the country saw the protests in Tiananmen Square unfold, and later saw other protests over the entire nation. Zhao Ziyang was put under house arrest for his sympathies to the protests and was replaced by Jiang Zemin. Jiang continued economic reforms, closing many SOEs and trimming down iron rice bowl. China's economy grew 7-fold during this time. British Hong Kong and Portuguese Macau returned to China in 1997 and 1999, respectively, as special administrative regions under the principle of one country, two systems. The country joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. On the 16th CCP National Congress in 2002, Hu Jintao succeeded Jiang as the General Secretary. Under Hu, China maintained its high rate of economic growth, overtaking the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Japan to become the world's second-largest economy. However, the growth also severely impacted the country's resources and environment, and caused major social displacement. Xi Jinping succeeded Hu as paramount leader on the 18th CCP National Congress in 2012. Shortly after his ascension to power, Xi launched a vast anti-corruption crackdown that prosecuted more than 2 million officials by 2022. During his tenure, Xi consolidated power unseen since the initiation of economic and political reforms. Politics. The People's Republic of China is a one-party state governed by the Chinese Communist Party, which considers itself to be Marxist, Leninist. This makes China one of the few countries governed by a communist party. The Chinese constitution states that the PRC is a socialist state governed by a people's democratic dictatorship that is led by the working class and based on an alliance of workers and peasants, that the state institutions shall practice the principle of democratic centralism, and that the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics is the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. The PRC officially terms itself as a democracy, using terms such as socialist consultative democracy, and whole process people's democracy. However, the country is commonly described as an authoritarian one-party state and a dictatorship, with among the heaviest restrictions worldwide in many areas, most notably against freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, reproductive rights, free formation of social organizations, freedom of religion and free access to the Internet. China has consistently been ranked amongst the lowest as an authoritarian regime by the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, ranking at 148th out of 167 countries in 2023. Chinese Communist Party. According to the CCP Constitution, its highest body is the National Congress held every 5 years. The National Congress elects the Central Committee, who then elects the party's Politburo, Politburo Standing Committee and the General Secretary, the top leadership of the country. The General Secretary holds ultimate power and authority over state and government and serves as the informal paramount leader. The current General Secretary is Xi Jinping, who took office on November 15, 2012. At the local level, the Secretary of the CCP Committee of a subdivision outranks the local government level, CCP Committee Secretary of a provincial division outranks the governor while the CCP Committee Secretary of a city outranks the mayor. The CCP is officially guided by Marxism adapted to Chinese circumstances. Government. The government in China is under the sole control of the CCP. The CCP controls appointments in government bodies, with most senior government officials being CCP members. The National People's Congress, with nearly 3,000 members, is constitutionally the highest organ of state power, though it has been also described as a rubber stamp body. The NPC meets annually, while the NPC Standing Committee, around 150 members elected from NPC delegates, meets every couple of months. Elections are indirect and not pluralistic, with nominations at all levels being controlled by the CCP. The NPC is dominated by the CCP, with another 8 minor parties having nominal representation under the condition of upholding CCP leadership. The president is elected by the NPC. The presidency is the ceremonial state representative, but not the constitutional head of state. The incumbent president is Xi Jinping, who is also the General Secretary of the CCP and the chairman of the Central Military Commission, making him China's paramount leader and supreme commander of the armed forces. The premier is the head of government, with Li Qiang being the incumbent. The premier is officially nominated by the president and then elected by the NPC, and has generally been either the second or third ranking member of the Politburo Standing Committee. The premier presides over the State Council, China's cabinet, composed of 4 vice premiers, state councillors, and the heads of ministries and commissions. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference is a political advisory body that is critical in China's United Front system, which aims to gather non-CCP voices to support the CCP. Similar to the People's Congresses, CPPCCs exist at various divisions, with the National Committee of the CPPCC being chaired by Wang Huning, fourth-ranking member of the PSC. The governance of China is characterized by a high degree of political centralization but significant economic decentralization. Policy instruments or processes are often tested locally before being applied more widely, resulting in a policy that involves experimentation and feedback. Generally, central government leadership refrains from drafting specific policies, instead using the informal networks and site visits to affirm or suggest changes to the direction of local policy experiments or pilot programs. The typical approach is that central government leadership begins drafting formal policies, law, or regulations after policy has been developed at local levels. Economy. China has the world's second-largest economy in terms of nominal GDP, and the world's largest in terms of purchasing power parity. As of 2022, China accounts for around 18% of global economy by nominal GDP. China is one of the world's fastest-growing major economies, with its economic growth having been almost consistently above 6% since the introduction of economic reforms in 1978. According to the World Bank, China's GDP grew from 150 billion in 1978 to 17.96 trillion by 2022. It ranks at 64th at GDP per capita, making it an upper-middle income country. Of the world's 500 largest companies, 142 are headquartered in China. China was one of the world's foremost economic powers throughout the arc of East Asian and global history. The country had one of the largest economies in the world for most of the past 2 millennia, during which it has seen cycles of prosperity and decline. Since economic reforms began in 1978, China has developed into a highly diversified economy and one of the most consequential players in international trade. Major sectors of competitive strength include manufacturing, retail, mining, steel, textiles, automobiles, energy generation, green energy, banking, electronics, telecommunications, real estate, e-commerce, and tourism. China has 3 out of the 10 largest stock exchanges in the world, including Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Shenzhen, that together have a market capitalization of over 15.9 trillion, as of October 2020. China has 4 out of the world's top 10 most competitive financial centers, which is more than any other country in the 2020 Global Financial Centers Index. Modern-day China is often described as an example of state capitalism or party-state capitalism. The state dominates in strategic pillar sectors such as energy production and heavy industries, but private enterprise has expanded enormously, with around 30 million private businesses recorded in 2008. According to official statistics, privately owned companies constitute more than 60% of China's GDP. China has been the world's largest manufacturing nation since 2010, after overtaking the US, which had been the largest for the previous 100 years. China has also been the second largest in high-tech manufacturing country since 2012, according to US National Science Foundation. China is the second largest retail market after the United States. China leads the world in e-commerce, accounting for over 37% of the global market share in 2021. China is the world's leader in electric vehicle consumption and production, manufacturing, and buying half of all the plug-in electric cars in the world as of 2022. China is also the leading producer of batteries for electric vehicles as well as several key raw materials for batteries. China in the global economy. China has been a member of the WTO since 2001 and is the world's largest trading power. By 2016, China was the largest trading partner of 124 countries. China became the world's largest trading nation in 2013 by the sum of imports and exports, as well as the world's largest commodity importer, comprising roughly 45% of maritime's dry bulk market. China's foreign exchange reserves reached US $3.128 trillion as of December 2022, making its reserves by far the world's largest. In 2022, China was amongst the world's largest recipient of inward foreign direct investment, attracting 180 billion, though most of these were speculated to be from Hong Kong. In 2021, China's foreign exchange remittances were US 53 billion, making it the second largest recipient of remittances in the world. China also invests abroad, with a total outward FDI of 146.5 billion in 2022, and a number of major takeovers of foreign firms by Chinese companies. Economists have argued that the renminbi is undervalued, due to currency intervention from the Chinese government, giving China an unfair trade advantage. China has also been widely criticized for manufacturing large quantities of counterfeit goods. The US government has also alleged that China does not respect intellectual property. In 2020, Harvard University's Economic Complexity Index ranked complexity of China's exports 17th in the world, up from 24th in 2010. The Chinese government has promoted the internationalization of the renminbi in order to wean off of its dependence on the US dollar as a result of perceived weaknesses of the international monetary system. The renminbi is a component of the IMF's special drawing rights and the world's fifth most traded currency as of 2022. However, partly due to capital controls that make the renminbi fall short of being a fully convertible currency, it remains far behind the euro, the US dollar and the Japanese yen in international trade volumes. Transport. Since the late 1990s, China's national road network has been significantly expanded through the creation of a network of national highways and expressways. In 2018, China's highways had reached a total length of 161,000 kilometers, making it the longest highway system in the world. China has the world's largest market for automobiles, having surpassed the United States in both auto sales and production. The country is the world's largest exporter of cars as of 2023. A side effect of the rapid growth of China's road network has been a significant rise in traffic accidents. In urban areas, bicycles remain a common mode of transport, despite the increasing prevalence of automobiles. As of 2012, there are approximately 470 million bicycles in China. China's railways, which are operated by the state-owned China State Railway Group Company, are among the busiest in the world, handling a quarter of the world's rail traffic volume on only 6% of the world's tracks in 2006. As of 2021, the country had 150,000 kilometers of railways, the second longest network in the world. The railways strain to meet enormous demand, particularly during the Chinese New Year holiday, when the world's largest annual human migration takes place. China's high-speed rail system started construction in the early 2000s. By the end of 2022, high-speed rail in China had reached 42,000 kilometers of dedicated lines alone, making it the longest HSR network in the world. Services on the Beijing, Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin, and Chengdu, Chongqing lines reach up to 350 kilometers each, making them the fastest conventional high-speed railway services in the world. With an annual ridership of over 2.3 billion passengers in 2019, it is the world's busiest. The network includes the Beijing, Guangzhou High-Speed Railway, the single longest HSR line in the world, and the Beijing-Shanghai High-Speed Railway, which has 3 of longest railroad bridges in the world. The Shanghai Maglev train, which reaches 431 km/h, is the fastest commercial train service in the world. Since 2000, the growth of rapid transit systems in Chinese cities has accelerated. As of January 2021, 44 Chinese cities have urban mass transit systems in operation. As of 2020, China boasts the 5 longest metro systems in the world, with the networks in Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Chengdu, and Shenzhen being the largest. The civil aviation industry in China is mostly state-dominated, with the Chinese government retaining a majority stake in the majority of Chinese airlines. The top 3 airlines in China, which collectively made up 71% of the market in 2018, are all state-owned. Air travel has expanded rapidly in the last decades, with the number of passengers increasing from 16.6 million in 1990 to 551.2 million in 2017. China had approximately 259 airports in 2024. China has over 2,000 river and seaports, about 130 of which are open to foreign shipping. Of the 50 busiest container ports, 15 are located in China, of which the busiest is the port of Shanghai, also the busiest port in the world. The country's inland waterways are the world's 6th longest, and total 27,700 kilometers. Languages. There are as many as 292 living languages in China. The languages most commonly spoken belong to the Sinitic branch of the Sino-Tibetan language family, which contains Mandarin, and other varieties of Chinese language, Jin, Wu, Min, Hakka, Yu, Xiang, Gan, Hui, Ping, and unclassified Tuhua. Languages of the Tibeto-Burman branch, including Tibetan, Qiang, Naxi and Yi, are spoken across the Tibetan and Yunnan, Guizhou Plateau. Other ethnic minority languages in southwestern China include Shuang, Tai, Dong, and Sui of the Tai-Kate family, Miao and Yao of the Hmong, Min family, and Wa of the Austro-Asiatic family. Across northeastern and northwestern China, local ethnic groups speak Altaic languages including Manchu, Mongolian, and several Turkic languages, Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Sala, and Western Yugur. Korean is spoken natively along the border with North Korea. Sarikoli, the language of Tajiks in western Xinjiang, is an Indo-European language. Taiwanese indigenous peoples, including a small population on the mainland, speak Austronesian languages. Standard Mandarin, a variety of Mandarin based on the Beijing dialect, is the national language and de facto official language of China. It is used as a lingua franca between people of different linguistic backgrounds. In the autonomous regions of China, other languages may also serve as a lingua franca, such as Uyghur in Xinjiang, where governmental services in Uyghur are constitutionally guaranteed. Urbanization. China has urbanized significantly in recent decades. The percent of the country's population living in urban areas increased from 20% in 1980 to over 66% in 2023. China has over 160 cities with a population of over 1 million, including the 17 megacities as of 2021 of Chongqing, Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Tianjin, Xi'an, Suzhou, Zhengzhou, Wuhan, Hangzhou, Linyi, Shijiazhuang, Dongguan, Qingdao, and Changsha. The total permanent population of Chongqing, Shanghai, Beijing, and Chengdu is above 20 million. Shanghai is China's most populous urban area, while Chongqing is its largest city proper, the only city in China with a permanent population of over 30 million. The figures in the table below are from the 2020 census, and are only estimates of the urban populations within administrative city limits. A different ranking exists for total municipal populations. The large floating populations of migrant workers make conducting censuses in urban areas difficult. The figures below include only long-term residents. Health. The National Health Commission, together with its counterparts in the local commissions, oversees the health needs of the population. An emphasis on public health and preventive medicine has characterized Chinese health policy since the early 1950s. The Communist Party started the Patriotic Health Campaign, which was aimed at improving sanitation and hygiene, as well as treating and preventing several diseases. Diseases such as cholera, typhoid, and scarlet fever, which were previously rife in China, were nearly eradicated by the campaign. After Deng Xiaoping began instituting economic reforms in 1978, the health of the Chinese public improved rapidly because of better nutrition, although many of the free public health services provided in the countryside disappeared. Healthcare in China became mostly privatized, and experienced a significant rise in quality. In 2009, the government began a 3-year large-scale healthcare provision initiative worth $124 billion. By 2011, the campaign resulted in 95% of China's population having basic health insurance coverage. By 2022, China had established itself as a key producer and exporter of pharmaceuticals, producing around 40% of active pharmaceutical ingredients in 2017. As of 2023, the life expectancy at birth exceeds 78 years. As of 2021, the infant mortality rate is 5 per thousand. Both have improved significantly since the 1950s. Rates of stunting, a condition caused by malnutrition, have declined from 33.1% in 1990 to 9.9% in 2010. Despite significant improvements in health and the construction of advanced medical facilities, China has several emerging public health problems, such as respiratory illnesses caused by widespread air pollution, hundreds of millions of cigarette smokers, and an increase in obesity among urban youths. In 2010, air pollution caused 1.2 million premature deaths in China. Chinese mental health services are inadequate. China's large population and densely populated cities have led to serious disease outbreaks, such as SARS in 2003, although this has since been largely contained. The COVID-19 pandemic was first identified in Wuhan in December 2019. Pandemic led the government to enforce strict public health measures intended to completely eradicate the virus, a goal that was eventually abandoned in December 2022 after protests against the policy. Religion. Freedom of religion is guaranteed by China's constitution, although religious organizations that lack official approval can be subject to state persecution. The government of the country is officially atheist. Religious affairs and issues in the country are overseen by the National Religious Affairs Administration, under the United Front Work Department. Over the millennia, the Chinese civilization has been influenced by various religious movements. The three doctrines, including Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, historically have a significant role in shaping Chinese culture, enriching a theological and spiritual framework of traditional religion which harks back to the early Shang and Zhou dynasty. Chinese folk religion, which is framed by the three doctrines and by other traditions, consists in allegiance to the Shen, a character that signifies the energies of generation, who can be deities of the surrounding nature or ancestral principles of human groups, concepts of civility, culture heroes, many of whom feature in Chinese mythology and history. Amongst the most popular cults of folk religion are those of Huangdi, embodiment of the God of heaven and one of the two divine patriarchs of the Chinese people, of Mizi goddess of the seas, Huandi god of war and business, Keshan god of prosperity and richness, Pangu and many others. In the early decades of the 21st century, the Chinese government has been engaged in a rehabilitation of folk cults, formally recognizing them as folk beliefs, and often reconstructing them into forms of highly curated civil religion, as well as in a national and international promotion of Buddhism. China is home to many of the world's tallest religious statues, representing either deities of Chinese folk religion or enlightened beings of Buddhism. The tallest of all is the Spring Temple Buddha in Henan. Statistics on religious affiliation in China are difficult to gather due to complex and varying definitions of religion and the diffusive nature of Chinese religious traditions. Scholars note that in China there is no clear boundary between the three doctrines and local folk religious practices. Chinese religions or some of their currents are also definable as non-theistic and humanistic, since they do not hold that divine creativity is completely transcendent, but that it is inherent in the world and in particular in the human being. According to studies published in 2023, compiling reliable demographic analyses holden throughout the 2010s and the early 2020s, 70% of the Chinese population believes in or practices Chinese folk religion. Among them, with an approach of non-exclusivity, 33.4% may be identified as Buddhists, 19.6% as Taoists, and 17.7% as adherents of other types of folk religion. Of the remaining population, 25.2% are fully non-believers or atheists, 2.5% are adherents of Christianity, and 1.6% are adherents of Islam. Chinese folk religion also comprises a variety of salvationist doctrinal organized movements which emerged since the Song dynasty. There are also ethnic minorities in China who maintain their own indigenous religions, while major religions characteristic of specific ethnic groups include Tibetan Buddhism among Tibetans, Mongols, and Uyghurs, and Islam among the Hui, Uyghur, Kazakh, and Kyrgyz peoples, and other ethnicities in the northern and northwestern regions of the country. Culture and society. Since ancient times, Chinese culture has been heavily influenced by Confucianism. Chinese culture, in turn, has heavily influenced East Asia and Southeast Asia. For much of the country's dynastic era, opportunities for social advancement could be provided by high performance in the prestigious imperial examinations, which have their origins in the Han Dynasty. The literary emphasis of the exams affected the general perception of cultural refinement in China, such as the belief that calligraphy, poetry, and painting were higher forms of art than dancing or drama. Chinese culture has long emphasized a sense of deep history and a largely inward-looking national perspective. Examinations and a culture of merit remain greatly valued in China today. Today, the Chinese government has accepted numerous elements of traditional Chinese culture as being integral to Chinese society. With the rise of Chinese nationalism and the end of the Cultural Revolution, various forms of traditional Chinese art, literature, music, film, fashion, and architecture have seen a vigorous revival, and folk and variety art in particular have sparked interest nationally and even worldwide. Access to foreign media remains heavily restricted. Tourism. China received 65.7 million international visitors in 2019, and in 2018 was the fourth most visited country in the world. It also experiences an enormous volume of domestic tourism. Chinese tourists made an estimated 6 billion travels within the country in 2019. China hosts the world's second largest number of World Heritage Sites after Italy, and is one of the most popular tourist destinations. Literature. Chinese literature has its roots in the Zhou dynasty's literary tradition. The classical texts of China encompass a wide range of thoughts and subjects, such as the calendar, military, astrology, herbology, and geography, as well as many others. Among the most significant early works are the I Ching and the Shijing, which are part of the 4 books and 5 classics. These texts were the cornerstone of the Confucian curriculum sponsored by the state throughout the dynastic periods. Inherited from the classic of poetry, classical Chinese poetry developed to its floruit during the Tang dynasty. Li Bai and Du Fu opened the forking ways for the poetic circles through Romanticism and Realism respectively. Chinese historiography began with the Shiji. The overall scope of the historiographical tradition in China is termed the 24 Histories, which set a vast stage for Chinese fictions along with Chinese mythology and folklore. Pushed by a burgeoning citizen class in the Ming dynasty, Chinese classical fiction rose to a boom of the historical, town and gods and demons fictions as represented by the 4 great classical novels, which include Water Margin, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Journey to the West and Dream of the Red Chamber. Along with the wuxia fictions of Jin Yang and Liang Yushen, it remains an enduring source of popular culture in the Chinese sphere of influence. In the wake of the New Culture movement after the end of the Qing dynasty, Chinese literature embarked on a new era with written vernacular Chinese for ordinary citizens. Hu Shi and Lu Sun were pioneers in modern literature. Various literary genres, such as Misty poetry, Scar literature, young adult fiction and the Sunjin literature, which is influenced by magic realism, emerged following the Cultural Revolution. Mo Yan, a Sunjin literature author, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2012. Architecture. Chinese architecture has developed over millennia in China and has remained a vestigial source of perennial influence on the development of East Asian architecture, including in Japan, Korea, and Mongolia. And minor influences on the architecture of Southeast and South Asia, including the countries of Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Chinese architecture is characterized by bilateral symmetry, use of enclosed open spaces, feng shui, a horizontal emphasis, and an allusion to various cosmological, mythological, or in general symbolic elements. Chinese architecture traditionally classifies structures according to type, ranging from pagodas to palaces. Chinese architecture varies widely based on status or affiliation, such as whether the structures were constructed for emperors, commoners, or for religious purposes. Other variations in Chinese architecture are shown in vernacular styles associated with different geographic regions and different ethnic heritages, such as the stilled houses in the south, the Yadong buildings in the northwest, the yurt buildings of nomadic people, and the Saihewan buildings in the north.